Okay, hello. Sorry. Oh, I just haven't quite enough time to make this transition, but oh well. Um, well, um, so before I start, did anyone have trouble like accessing the metaphysics exercise or anything like that? Questions about that? Okay. I still haven't set my office hours. Ugh. Um, they're going to be on Mondays and Tuesdays probably, which is kind of bad because that means I've already missed Mondays and Tuesdays. But oh well. Um, the end of the week is busy. Um, all right. So okay. So the main problem, basically the plot of the next two lectures is that in this one I'm introducing this problem, which is called the problem of the categorical status of the differential. That is showing how it comes up as a problem in Aristotle. And then the next lecture is going to be looking at the attempts of Neoplatonists and Aristotelians to solve this problem. Um, so, and as I said, I mean, this is both going to be an example of what it was like to be an Aristotelian, and what the Aristotelian tradition was like, but it's also going to be a specific problem that feeds into the things that the early modern people are worrying about. So, okay, and so basically the question is differentiate, and I'll say more about differentiate in a second, but the question is, what are they? So they have to be seemingly either in a subject or not in a subject, right? Those are contradictory opposites. So that means they have to either be whatever they are, right? I mean, you don't have to know anything about what the word means to already say, well, whatever it is, it's either in a subject or not in a subject, right? So they should either belong to the category of substance or to one of the other categories. But we'll see that there's big problems either way. And that is both textual problems in Aristotle. Aristotle sometimes seems to say one and sometimes seems to say the other, and sometimes seems to say kind of neither or both in a confusing way. Um, but also conceptual problems, like, you know, um, if these are supposed to do the thing that Aristotelian differentiator is supposed to do, then it's confusing what kind of things they could be. Um, 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 and there's one other complication, which is that so the question of how to understand Aristotle's texts about this is going to turn on the question of, or at least partly on the question of when he's using certain words in the same sense or in two different senses. Um, um, but and I mentioned this before already, one of the main points of Aristotle philosophy was to distinguish the many senses in which words could be said. Um, um, in fact, and uh, this is in one of today's readings, he was the one who introduced the terminology that we still use to discuss this, right? Of like synonymous, homonymous, or as I said in Latin, univocal and equivocal. We still use that terminology to discuss the question of do these apparently the same words mean the same thing or not? So Aristotelians are, as they discuss this question, are also, they're trying to fit it into Aristotle's discussion of how the same word can be used different ways. Um, um, by the way, I think, the fact that, and this is hardly the only example, the fact that philosophers or even non-philosophers, like everyone, like um, is still, without realizing it, using Aristotle's terms to discuss certain questions, is it's part of, or it's at least a hint as to why, I mean, you might think, and I could have discussed this in the first lecture, or maybe I should have. You might think, why should we study the history of philosophy at all? Right? Like, if you want to know what the world is like, well, you might want to read the latest issues of some science journals or something, but basically, you should go into a room and sit down and think for yourself, right? Like, why look at what Aristotle said? But the truth is that when you think for yourself, you're going to be using Aristotle's terminology without realizing it. You won't know where it came from. So when you phrase the questions to yourself without knowing it, you'll be phrasing them in a way that's due to Aristotle. Um, so so you're missing an important piece of information about yourself when if you try to just kind of sit down and do it from the start. What is the self or whatever? Um, so I don't know. That's obviously only a partial answer, but I mean, maybe it's the main part of what I think the answer is. That the reason philosophers need to study the history of philosophy is because if you don't know the history of philosophy, you don't know what you're talking about, because you don't know where your words came from. And you don't know where your questions came from, why they started, how they started to look like good questions they answer, etc. Okay, anyway, back to Aristotle. So, okay, so what are differentiae? So it's in order to give a succinct answer to questions like that I brought in the reading from Porphyry, from the Isagogy. Um, um, right, it's written, I guess, I don't know who this person is. I don't know if anyone knows. It's written for the benefit of Porphyry's friend or student or whatever, Chrysaorius. All right. Anyway, he starts by saying, in order to teach Aristotle's categories, it's necessary to know what a genus is, what a differentiae is, what a species is, what a proprium is, and what an accident is. And therefore, he's going to go out. So those are called the five predicables, and he's going to go through that list and say, give definitions of each of those. Or maybe they're not really definitions because there's no genus and species, but they're descriptions by which you can recognize them anyway. And let me start with differentia, right? So on differentia, defining differentiae, they say, a differentia is that by which the species surpasses the genus. This is the first stab at what it means. For human has rational and mortal beyond what animal has. So this is sometimes called the tree of Porphyry. So he's thinking, so we have substance is the highest genus, and then it's divided into what are these words? Right. I mean, it works, but it's like, can you see that? Not very well. You don't have a little thick black one. Little box of these just remember to What is that? All right. So substance is divided into non-living and living. Um, Living is divided into plants and animals. Plants and animals. And then Porphyry, at least here, seems to think that that animal is divided into mortal and immortal. What are immortal animals? Well, the celestial bodies are immortal animals, I think is what he's thinking. Right? So according to Neoplatonists, the celestial bodies are animals. They have souls and they move and they have sense of some kind. Therefore, they're animals and not plants. Um, but they're immortal animals. So this is where Porphyry is fitting them into this tree. I mean, if you remember the quote from Aristotle, Metaphysics, where it seems like he wants to separate natural substances on one side and then divide them up into two parts. And the natural understanding of that is that he's dividing it into sublunar and celestial, right? So then this division would go way up here instead. But Neoplatonists don't understand it that way. Whatever, they're trying to reconcile with what Plato says in the laws. Never mind. Anyway, so and then under mortal animal we have human, right? So that's why he says human has rational and mortal beyond what animal has. In other words, in his understanding, the correct definition of human is not rational animal, but rational mortal. That's a complication that I'm gonna try to pretty much ignore. All right, so let's just put human and the differentiate as rational. Right. So the differentia, we understand from what he says, what is the differentia? Right, the singular is differentia and plural is differentiae. The differentia of human is rational. And the first attempt to say what that is it's that by which the species exceeds the genus. So in this case, the genus is animal, right? So this is the genus and this is the differential. And that's the usual form of an Aristotelian definition. So it's that by which the species exceeds the genus. What's the genus? So if you look just farther up, he says, and he mentions some other things that genus can mean, which are actually somewhat important in the long run, but he says the philosophical sense of genus is the following. Genus is what is predicated in the what is it of many things which differ in species, such as, for example, animal. So the idea is, there's two things here. First, like, what do we have a list of five, in a list of five predicables? Well, it's a list of ways things can be predicated of many different things, right? Like, as we might say, universal terms or something like that. It leaves out things like proper names that can only be predicated on one thing, right? This is Socrates. You understand what I mean by predicated? Like, if you have a sentence, like, Socrates is mortal. This is the subject and this is the predicate. And you predicate this of Socrates. You say Socrates is mortal. But this, it's not only Socrates you can say this about. There's lots of things you can say this about, right? So predicables are all like that, but Porphyry is, and I mean, almost everything here is based on something Aristotle says, mostly in that book called The Topics. Yeah.
Also, like, is white also predicable of Socrates?
Well, yeah, so if I say Socrates is white, then I'm predicating white of Socrates. There's many different things I can predicate of Socrates. Socrates is an animal, Socrates is a substance, Socrates is white now, Socrates is, right. So Socrates is able to laugh. I mean, it has the same, like, grammatical structure, all these sentences. But Porphyry is saying, following Aristotle, that they're not all this, it's not all the same kind of predication. Right? There's 5 different ways that something can be predicable of many. And of genus, he says, it is predicated in the what is it of many things which differ in species. So differ in species, right? So here we have like human and a horse. And under horse, we have Bucephalus. And under, I shouldn't have written this here, but oh well, it's too late now. Under human, we have Socrates. So Socrates and Bucephalus belong to different species, whatever that means. Animal can be predicated of both of them. Okay, but lots of things can be predicated of both of them, right? Like, was in Greece. They were both in Greece at some point. So I guess Bucephalus started off in Macedonia. He arrived in Greece. Right. So that's something that can be predicated on many that differ in species. For example, Socrates and Bucephalus, that's many, more than one, and they differ in species. So that's why Porphyry adds this other thing. It's not just anything that can be predicated of many that differ in species. It can be predicated in, and I translated in the what is it? I mean, that's literally what it says in Greek, actually. Like, tiesti, what is it? But used as a noun. Sometimes this is translated, this obviously is just a Latin translation, that's quiddity, quidditas, right? This quid part means what? But in any case, whatever this is, it's predicated in the what is it means that, like, this is an answer to the question, what is this? Now, I mean, it can't, not in the sense that you could use that as a test or something, right? I mean, I think we probably use in Greek and in English, use the question, what is it, to ask for lots of different kinds of information. But there's a sense of what is it, in which it's right to say that an answer to that is, so it's a human, it's an animal. Whereas to say it was in Greece is not an answer to that question, right? That's the question, answer to the question, where is it? That's not a question, answer to the question, what is it? So, like, now it's still not obvious that there could be lots of kind of coordinate answers to the question, what is it? Right? Like, that is that didn't form a hierarchy, one under the other. There'd be lots of possible ways of saying what Socrates is, each of which is just kind of like equally valid in its own terms. You know, Socrates is a human, Socrates is a, I don't know, snub-nosed being, or I don't know what the other answers would be. But Porphyry's assumption, and part of the question about whether Porphyry is a good interpreter of Aristotle is whether this is also Aristotle's assumption. But Porphyry's assumption is that there's one, like, not that there's only one answer, but that all the answers for any given individual fall into this hierarchy. Right? So, in other words, there isn't something else on the same level as animal that's predicated of both Bucephalus and Socrates in the what isn't. This is the genus that they both belong to. There aren't like overlapping genera. Again, that's not obvious. But it's not totally absurd either, I think. I mean, I'm always walking a fine line when I try to explain some historical philosopher's view, because I don't want to tell you everything he says is true. That's definitely not right. But on the other hand, I don't want it to seem ridiculous. Like, you have to understand why someone would say this. Right, this is basically expressing the idea that there's a natural way to divide everything up into kinds. And it has different levels to it. First, you divide everything up and first you sort of divide everything up into substances and other things. But remember, substance is supposed to be a highest genus. So that part's a little weird. But, first you divide all substances into living and non-living. That's the natural way to divide substance. And then each one of those, you find a natural way to divide that. And then in each one of those, and eventually you get down to the lowest species. So that's the way we're thinking about it. And again, the first attempt to say what a differentiae is it's that by which the species exceeds the genus, right? So that is, to be a human, it's not enough to be an animal, but you also have to be rational. So saying that something is human adds something to saying that it's an animal. And presumably, if we knew the true differentiae of horse, which I don't think there are even candidates for that out there in the Aristotelian tradition, right? I mean, there's very few candidates for differentiae. But if we knew the true differentiae of the horse, we would similarly be able to say what it takes to be a horse is not just to be an animal, but also have this horse character, right? We'd be able to say what that was. Then he goes on to discuss different meanings of differentia. So the first thing he says is, I think, not directly relevant here because it's giving a non-technical sense of the word in Greek. They also give thus they also give the definition of differentia thus: a differentia is that by which each thing differs. For human and horse do not differ according to genus, for both we and the irrational animals are mortal animals. So again, he thinks the immediate genus is mortal animal. But anyway, both we and the irrational animals are animals, let's say, but rational, when it is added, divides us from them. Okay, so this is better because it explains why it's called differentiae. So right, it's that by which things differ from each other. We don't, Bucephalus and Socrates don't differ in genus, they're both animals, but they differ because Socrates is rational and Bucephalus is. And again, also presumably because, although maybe he's hinting that there's a further genus here, irrational animal, and then it divides into species. But I mean, presumably we could say Bucephalus differs from Socrates because Bucephalus has the horse differentia and Socrates doesn't. But further working out matters concerning differentiae, they say that a differentiae is not any chance thing by which separates members of the same genus, but only that which contributes to the being and is a part of the what it would be to be of the thing. For being naturally apt to sail is not a differentia of human, even if it is a proprium of human. So, so first of all, I mean, we've seen among the predicables, I've read these two so far. Differentia, we're now saying is, it's not just any way that one species can differ from the other species under the same genus. There's another way they could differ, and that's what he's calling a proprium. And he gives an example of a proprium of human, namely naturally apt to sail, right? Like able to sail. So I guess, right, the idea is that, I mean, of course, not all humans sail. But all humans have the capacity to sail, and no other animals do. So all and only humans have that characteristic. A more common example, which I think Porphyry himself actually gives under the discussion of proprium, is visible that is able to laugh. As something that supposedly all and only humans have. Right? All humans have this ability. Now, I mean, what does that mean exactly? Like if I'm in a coma, I can't laugh, but I'm still human. So I mean, there's some complications here, but the thought is that being able to laugh is part of the nature of humans. Maybe some things can interfere with it sometimes. But it's part of the nature of humans to be able to laugh. Another example, assuming that the true differentia of human is rational, might be featherless biped, right? Like only humans are featherless bipeds, all and only humans, let's say. Unless, I mean, right, Diogenes the Cynic supposedly heard that definition and brought in a plucked chicken and said, this is Plato's man. So, right, anyway, I mean, again, it gets to the question of what it means that, like, you have to be like, it's not just not having feathers, but it's like naturally not having feathers, right? It belonging to our nature not to have feathers and to be bipeds. Even though not everyone has two legs, again, but it belongs to human nature to have two legs. So, I mean, this again is the way Aristotle and Aristotelians think about things. It's certainly open to question, but on the other hand, we really do think about things this way most of the time. So there's something to it. So anyway, so the point is that like a proprium is something you could use, at least in the strictest sense of proprium, as he describes in the discussion of proprium. In the strict sense of proprium, a proprium is something that can be predicated on all and only the members of a certain species. But it's not in the what is it? Or he uses a couple other apparent synonyms for that here, which I translated as the being and the what it would be to be of the thing. T-A-N-I, a very difficult expression to translate. Um, um, the term essence, which now, I mean, remember, again, in Greek, there's one term ousia, which sometimes is translated substance and other times translated essence. But I mean, but they tended to use the translation essentia, although this is not 100% rule, but they tended to use the translation essentia when Aristotle was using ousia apparently as a synonym for all of these things we were just talking about. The what is it, the what it would be to be, right? So another way you can say is that, another thing you can say is that the ability to laugh doesn't belong to the essence of humans. It's not a part of the human essence. Although it can be used to recognize humans. Right, so again, this gets back, I think, from a different route to the idea that the genus says what the members of all the different species have essentially in common. And the differentiae says what that by which they essentially differ from each other. Now, so what about species? So this Porphyry gives a long discussion of species, which is confusing, but it's confusing because so he's trying to distinguish two different meanings of species. One of them is like, and I think this is well, maybe I shouldn't say that. I think this is the one of them, which I think is the main one, is that species has a relative sense. So that's the definition where he says, a species is what is ordered under the genus, and which the genus is predicated of in the what is it. So an example of that would be human. Human is a species. Why? Because it's ordered under a genus, animal. An animal is predicated of it in the what is it. What is a human? It's an animal. But the reason I say this, it's a relative term in this sense, is that animal also is a species in this sense. Why? Because it's ordered under a genus, living, and living is predicated on it in the what is it? What is an animal? It's a living thing. Now, in Greek, you wouldn't have to add the thing. You could just say it's a living. Right. But there's so therefore notice, like in this sense, it's not at all like our use of, I mean, it's the origin obviously of our use of species and genus in biology, but it's not at all like that in the sense that like the way we use it in biology now, this is a species, and then one over it is a genus, and then the one over it is something else, like a family, or I don't know. There's some kind of obscene acronym to remember. All right. Anyway, right, it ends with gay sex because it's genus. Anyway, so, right. So, but in this system, there's only two terms, genus and species. Right? So like this is a species of this, but this is a species of this, and this is a species of this. Or this is a genus of this is a genus of this is a genus of this. He also gives another definition of species in which only this one is a species. Right? That's where he says, a species is that which is predicated in the one is it of many things which differ numerically. So did I talk about numerical difference last time? I did. Okay, right. So numerical difference is the difference between things that are essentially the same. That is completely essentially the same. They have their essences are I mean, that is, Bucephalus and Socrates are essentially the same in that animal belongs to both their essences, but they're also essentially different. Things that differ only numerically are essentially completely the same, like Socrates and Plato. And this definition says the species is what predicated in the what is it of things that differ numerically. And we have to take that to mean only numeric, right? I mean, Socrates and Bucephalus also differ numerically, I guess. Like I mean, if you ask how many things are there, 1, 2, right? But you were talking about mere numerical difference. So in that sense, so in the other sense, you call this the lowest species. And like I said, I think that's the more usual one, but in another sense, you can say only this is really a species. The others are generic. And sometimes people talk that way too. Right, and then Porphyry goes through a little list here. Let what has been said become clear with respect to one category. Substance itself is a genus. Under it is body. I guess I should have put body in incorporeal. Should have put that at the first level. All right. So anyway, and like I said, this is sometimes called the tree of Porphyry, because when you think of it as a tree of Porphyry, you go all the way up there. Substance itself is a genus. Under it is body. Under body, animate body. Under which is animal. But under animal is mortal animal. Under which is human. But under human are Socrates and Plato and all the particular humans. But of these, substance is the most generic, and that which is only genus, whereas human is the most specific, and that which is only species. But body is a species of substance and a genus of animate body. Right. So I mean, what I'm translating as animate body obviously means any living thing, including plants. So right. So this is the highest genus. It's only a genus. What does that mean? It means I think now I can say more precisely what it means that it's the highest genus. That members of this genus don't have anything essentially in common with things that are outside it. Right? So between Socrates and any other substance, there's something essentially in common, at least they're substances. Right? So even when you compare Socrates to an angel, they have that part of their essence in common. But compare Socrates to the whiteness in Socrates, and they have nothing essentially in common. Okay. And right, so that's the highest genus. This is the lowest species. And in between, we have things that can be looked at as genus or species, depending on which direction you're going. And then the fifth predicable is accident. An accident is basically, and I think he even gives this definition. No, maybe he doesn't here. One way you could define the predicable as accident is that it's a predicable that's not any of the other four. Right? So it's not essential and it doesn't belong all and only to one species. right? So, and it can fail either in the all or the only or both, right? So like black is not a proprium of ravens because although all ravens are black, unless you paint them or they're albino or whatever. But anyway, all ravens, according to the Raven nature, are black. Um, but lots of other things are also black. So that's not appropriate. And, you know, on the other hand, like maybe, um, well, if you change from capacity to sail to like having the profession of sailing, like being a sailor, right? So only humans are sailors, let's say, but not all humans are sailors. So that's also not appropriate. And you know, Porphyry says some of these are things that come to be and pass away in the subject, or that sometimes has and sometimes not. Right? Like Socrates is sometimes white and sometimes black, whatever that means exactly. But others are permanent. And actually he gives the example of blackness in a raven, I believe. Also blackness in an Ethiopian, right? So an Ethiopian means um, right, a sub-Saharan African. And and Porphyry is saying um, they don't differ essentially from Socrates and Plato. They're members of the same lowest species. Um, but they have an inseparable accident that Socrates and Plato don't have. Um, so um, so as far as that goes, that's correct, right? Like it's not racist. They're all the same little species, and that's all there is to say about it in terms of essence. That is not to say that Aristotle and other ancient Greek philosophers aren't racist in some way, but it's the category, the racial categories are different, right? Like it's actually they think the people in the middle are good, and then the people in the south, where it's too hot, are you know the dark-skinned barbarians, and then the people in the north where it's too cold are the light-skinned barbarians. And in between we have, right, like Berbers, Arabs, Italians, Greeks, Indians, right? Like all those medium colored people who live in the temperate region. So, and those are better, is what they mostly think. Not necessarily all of them. As with any society, there are different opinions. But yeah, so anyway, but you know, but even if he is racist, it's not because of a difference in essence. They all belong to the same lowest species. Um, okay. Um, okay, so that's the end of my discussion of the predicables. Are there questions about the predicables before I go on? Yes.
Can you go to the difference between the program and accident again?
Yeah, and so I guess I should have said, by the way, it seems like this use of accident is not the same as the use of accident where we say substance or accident, right? Rather, it seems that at least both of these, and of course, we know that both of these, at least if you're talking about species and genera of substances, are substances, right? They're secondary substances. That's where they come in the categories. It seems like both of these clearly are accidents, right? So even something that all and only humans have and that they always have, if it's not essential to them, it's gonna belong to one of the other categories. So it's not going to be the answer to what is it, it's going to be the answer to how much is it, how is it, where is it, right? Like one of those other 9 things. So both of these are kinds of accidents. under the categorical status of the differentiator, the question is, what about this one, right? But before getting to that, so these are both kinds of accidents in the broader sense, but these are accidents that characterize a certain species. Again, they belong to all and only the members of that species. So they're proper to that species. That's why it's called proprium. The Greek word is idion, which, yeah, basically means the same thing. Proper to. These are accidents that are proper to a certain species. Does that? Whereas these are all the other accidents. So I mean, so like this isn't an ontological distinction here. I mean, not that. So ontology, I said epistemology is a 19th century word. Ontology, I think, was introduced by Wolff or people around that time. So it's like a late 17th, early 18th century term. So Aristotle doesn't talk about ontology, but I mean, he does say metaphysics is the science of being and the proper the properties of being as such. I'm not quoting that right. But anyway, so like this is the ontological difference. These are like the same kinds of things, but it's a difference in how things are predicated, I guess, because the idea being that when you predicate a proprium of something, you're telling how to sort, you're giving me a way to sort it out from things of other kinds, even though it's not the essential way. It's not the true way. We'll see that according to Avicenna, and especially according to Thomas Aquinas, like we always really sort species of sensible things by propria. We don't know the true differentiae. But that's not obvious. And that's kind of weird. All right. So yeah. Yeah. Yes. It's also somehow related to idiot, I think, but that's more complicated, but yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of words like that idiolect, idiopathic, I think is the word. Yeah. All right. Um, okay, so that's the predicables. Now, for the reason I mentioned, I'm going to now talk about Aristotle on univocality and equivocality, which we'll see connects up to this because right away essence comes up again. And so I'm using the Latin terms, right? Like I said, the Greek terms are synonymous and homonymous. So I mean, I could use the Greek terms. I just like throughout have mostly used the Latin terms because they're mostly more familiar. Like they mostly are already English words, like substance. Right. So just for consistency, I'm using the Latin terms, which are also perfectly understandable, namely equivocal and univocal, or univocal and equivocal. Right. So this is the definition. Things of which the name only is in common, but the account of the essence according to the name is different, are said to be equivocal. As for example, now, I mean, first of all, so and I already mentioned both of the examples last time quickly, but I'll mention them again. So like one example of an equivocal word in English would be bank. Oops, this is one that doesn't. Bank is one that doesn't work. This is the standard example of something that, as the medievals would say, is absolutely equivocal. Meaning, although I guess there's some historical reason why both of these things are called bank. If the way the word is used now, there isn't something in common between, you know, the building where they keep the money and the side of the river, by virtue of which we call them both banks. Right? There's just no relation between them. It's just, the word just has those two different meanings. Aristotle doesn't give an example like that, however. This is Aristotle's example. As, for example, both a human and a picture, and I added in brackets of a human, because I think that's what he means. As, for example, both a human and a picture are animals. For of these only the name is in common, but the account of the essence according to the name is different. For if someone were to give an account of what it is for each of them to be animal, they would give a special account for each. Right now, I mean, of course, it's hard to draw this on the board because everything I draw on the board is not a human, but a picture of a human. But is it okay to erase this? I'll probably regret it, but. So, as I'm going to draw, here's a human, that's Socrates, and here's a picture of a human. So, like, the idea is that these are both called animal, right? Like, if you say, what is this? You can say, it's an animal. And if I point to this and we say, what is this? You can say, it's an animal. Now, well, let me just go on with the way Porphyry understands it and then raise some doubts about it. So, but I mean, sorry, the way Aristotle understands it. So Aristotle says, you know, but if you were to, the account according to of the essence, according to the name, is basically giving the definition. Right? Like a saying what animals all have in common. So I would give, now you're regretting I erased it. I would give whatever the differentiae is of animal, right? And the genus, living thing. And that would tell you what it is to be an animal in this case. But that definition wouldn't apply to this, right? This is not a living thing. It doesn't have senses. It doesn't move. Whatever the differentiae of animal is, like the genus and differentiae of animal they don't apply to this. So Aristotle says, you know, therefore, the word animal is used equivocally here. That's what you mean by equivocal. Whereas if we were to take, say, Socrates and Bucephalus, this is an animal, this is an animal, but here you would give the same definition. You would give the same account. Account here translates this Greek word logos, which is very, it means a lot of different things. It means word, it means ratio in mathematics. And in this case, it means not a word, but, well, an account, some kind of phrase that answers the question. Yes, yeah.
Like a human name, you can say something like that because, like, it's like there's people who have the same.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a good question because it raises all kinds of questions about what names are and what.
I don't mean to.
Well, no, I mean, it's, because you want to say, and I even said this before, a proper name only applies to one individual. But of course, that's not really true of the names we use, right? Like in ancient times, there's, some, there's places where people list how many people have the same name. There's like, there are like 7 Socrates. There's Socrates of Athens, and there's other, the other Socrates are not important, but nevertheless, yeah. So, is that the same word? If it is the same word, it's definitely equivocal. We, I mean, although sometimes we say something like, he looks like a Paul. What are we doing when we say that? Some kind of association, like the different people with new name Paul all kind of mixed together. I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, so I guess I would say if you treat having the same name as having the same universal predicated in both of you, then it would be equivocal. It's not the same universal, something like that. Yeah, so it's a good question, but it's too hard. All right. Anyway, so right, so back to this. I mean, this is already hard enough, believe me. So, right, so this is the definition of, this is the example of equivocal. This actually in univocal, I think he actually uses a ox or something, but in any case, it's the same idea. We have 2 animals. These are animals in the same sense of animal. So animal is predicated univocally of both these individuals, whereas animal is predicated correctly but equivocally in this. However, this is not exactly like the case of bank, right? It's not just random that this is also called an animal. This is called an animal because it's a picture of this kind of thing. It's so there's a primary sense of animal. Is the way Aristotle understands the situation like this, right? The primary sense of animal is this kind of thing that, like, moves and eats and all those things that animals do. But other things can be called animals because of their relation, in a secondary sense, because of their relation to animals in the primary sense. Another example of this that Aristotle discusses elsewhere, is actually, I think it's one of the readings for today, is healthy. Right? So here are different things you can call it healthy. You can say Socrates is healthy. You can say this energy bar is healthy. Probably not. But anyway, you say this energy bar is healthy. Let me say this raw broccoli is healthy. Right? So you can say this urine sample is healthy. Now, I mean, healthy, like if you were to give a definition of healthy in all 3 of those cases, it wouldn't be the same. Right? Like the raw broccoli is not healthy in the way an animal, I mean, it is a plant, I guess, but quay plant, it's not very healthy. It's been cut off from its roots and it's like dying, right? So that's not what you mean when you say it's healthy. And the urine sample, right? It's not healthy in the way Socrates is healthy. It's not, living its best life. Right? It's not alive at all. It's urine in a cup, right? So Aristotle says or thinks the primary sense of healthy is the sense in which an animal can be called healthy. Socrates is healthy, Cephalus is healthy. But the broccoli can be called healthy because it's a cause of the primary kind of health. Right? Like if Socrates eats broccoli, Socrates will become healthy in the primary sense. So in a secondary sense, we call the broccoli healthy. Now, there's some people say in English you're supposed to say healthful in that situation and not healthy. But in Greek they hadn't heard of that, so they go on. All right. So the broccoli can be called healthy because it's a cause of health. The urine sample can be called healthy because it's a sign of health. Right? Like if the urine sample has these such and such characteristics, it's Socrates' urine sample, then it's a sign that Socrates is healthy in the primary sense. Okay. One more thing about this though. Well, two more things about it. That was all from reading L. From reading M, when something is offered as a genus, now add in those in brackets because this is from a book called The Topics, which it's not 100% clear what it's about. It seems to be kind of like instructions for participating in a debate, like perhaps in a Platonic, in Plato's Academy, or like an imaginary debate with Socrates or something like that. And it gives, but it's very long and it gives lots of ways to spot fallacies and stuff like that, basically. Right. So when something is offered as a genus, right, like you ask your opponent to define something and they say the genus is so and so, one must investigate whether the genus is not univocal in each species. For the genus is predicated univocally of all its species. Right, and because again of the diagram that I erased, you can see why this is, right? The genus, the definition of genus was, or the description of genus anyway, was that genus is what is said in the what is it of things that differ in species. So this means that when you ask about these things, like Socrates and Bucephalus, what this genus means, you ask for the definition of it, an account, an essential account of what this genus is. Of course, you're going to give the same answer for both of them. Right? The whole point of it is that it's predicated essentially, the same thing is predicated essentially of both of them. So the name of a true genus is univocal. That is, it's applied univocal to all the species, all the members of the species that fall under it, and also to the species themselves. Right? Remember, Aristotle talks both ways. Like you can say Socrates is an animal, but you can also say human is. And remember, there's no indefinite article. So you can also say human is, you can say Socrates is animal. You can also say human is animal. All right. So um, um, so this is a connection between this terminology of univocal and equivocal. And this setup of predicals. And then one other thing, which is reading N. Well, actually, there's several. N, O, and P all deal with this, but let me just read, just to introduce the idea of reading N. Being, this is a famous sentence of Aristotle, being is said in many ways, but relative to one thing and one nature. And now he says, and not equivocally. So that's why I went into that whole thing, right? In the categories, when he introduces this terminology, he's treating this as an example of equivocal. But here in the metaphysics, when he's saying it's not equivocal, he's thinking of only this as an instance of equivocal. Right? So he says, being is said in many ways, but relative to one thing and one nature, and not equivocally, but just as all things are said to be healthy, that are said to be healthy are relative to health, whether through preserving or producing or being a sign of health, or because of being receptive of it, Just so also being is said in many ways, but all relative to one principle. Some things are called beings because they are substances, some because they are affections of substance, some because they are a way to substance, or corruptions, or privations, or quantities, or producers, or generators of substance, or of the things relative to substance, or negations of one of these, or of substance. Right? So that whole long list is very complicated. It clearly contains more than just the 10 categories, presumably because it includes things that are not said simply. Right? Remember at the beginning of the categories, these are the 10 ways in which things are said simply. But some of these other things like negations and whatever are not simple. Okay, but in any case, we know that substance, and it looks like the other categories are also going to come in here. It's like the example of healthy. And in fact, in Greek, there's a similarity in, the word health and the word substance, which remember in Greek is something like beingness, have the same form. So it makes it easier to see. But he's saying, like, just as there's health in the primary sense, and then there's other things that are called healthy because they're producers of health or signs of health or whatever. So being, there's a primary sense, substance, and then there are things that are called being because, and at least in the kinds of the categories, we can say because they're quantities of beings or qualities of beings or relations of beings, right? That's the idea. So, so first of all, this helps to explain somewhat better why we have these highest genera. You want to say, these are the 10 kinds of being. But Aristotle is saying, there isn't really one thing that they're kinds of. We call them all beings, sure enough. But just like it would be a mistake to say, there are 4 kinds of health. The health of animals, the health of food, the health of urine samples, and whatever the 4th one would be. That would be a mistake because those aren't really 4 different kinds of the same thing. Those are 4 different ways the same word is used. Does that make sense, what I just said? Some people are looking kind of upset at that. Or like, look, here, if you were listing kinds of animals, you wouldn't list humans, pictures of humans, horses, pictures of horses, right? Those are not, you can call these both animals, but they aren't 2 kinds of the same thing. They aren't 2 kinds of the same thing precisely because they don't have something essential in common. But they're not just unrelated. It's not a coincidence that we call them both animals. And the same thing is supposed to be true in the case of being. So, and if you look back at the readings from last week, you can see him saying, substance is prior in being, or right now we can understand, at least, again, we're all looking at this from the point of view of an Aristotelian who thinks of Aristotle as one self-consistent corpus, right? So if Aristotle says one thing in the categories and something else in the metaphysics, you can put them together to figure out what he means. Or you have to reconcile them with each other to understand what he means. And looking at it from that point of view, now we understand better what those list of 10 categories are. It's a list of 10 ways that the word being is used. Sure enough, in reading O, also from a different book of the metaphysics, he says, but the things which are said to have being per se are the ones which the figures of category signify. So again, I take it that is, maybe I'm too influenced by Brentano in saying this. Franz Brentano, who's an Austrian philosophy of the late 19th, early 20th century, wrote a book called Of the Many Senses of Being in Aristotle, which was very influential on Husserl and Heidegger and a bunch of other people, and me. But in any case, so maybe I'm being too influenced by Brentano here, but I think when he says those that are said, those things that have being per se or whatever, again, he's narrowing it down to those 10 things that are said simply or whatever, and leaving out these other kinds of being, like negation and so forth. So, right, so again, but the things which are said to have being per se are the ones which the figures of category signify, for in as many ways as they are said, in so many ways does being signify. If then some predicates signify a what is it, some a quality, some a quantity, some a relation, some an action or a passion, some a where, some a when, then for each of these being signifies the same. Meaning that as long as you stay in the same category, being has the same meaning. But if you move to a different category, being has a different meaning. Okay, so how is this related to the categorical status of the differentiae? Um, well, okay, maybe I should reading P before going on because it's crucial to the puzzle. This is reading P from the Nicomachean Ethics, talking about good, trying to give a definition of good or to say if there is a definition of good. Since furthermore good is said equally of every being, for it is said in the what, as for example, God and intellect, right? Those are example of substances that are good. In quality, the virtues. So the virtues are qualities that are good. In quantity, the proper measure. In relation, the useful. And in time, the proper time. And in place, the proper place, and so forth. It is clear that good could not be any one universal common thing, for it would not be said in all the categories, but in one only. Right? So what he's adding here is that not only is it true that as long as you stay within the same category, being retains the same meaning. Whereas if you go to a different category, it has a different meaning. There are no predicates that retain the same meaning as you go from one category to another. Right? That's what his argument seems to assume. Because he's saying, since we call substances good and qualities good and quantities good, he's basically arguing against Plato here. Since we call all those things good, and those belong to different categories, they have nothing essential in common. Therefore, we can't be saying the same thing about them when we call each one of them good. Although obviously there's going to be some relation, right? If we don't just randomly call, you know, the proper time good and the proper measure good, and right, there's obviously some relation there, but he's saying it's not univocality. Okay, so now categorical status of the differentiae. So the basic question, okay, the basic question is, are the differentiae accidents or substances? And it's going to look like neither answer is very good. If they are accidents, then they're probably qualities, right? So remember, that's one of the 10 categories. Why might you think they were accidents? Well, first of all, going to the end here, reading X clearly implies that they're not substances. Reading X, it is common to all substances not to be in a subject. For a primary substance is neither said according to a subject nor is in a subject, and is thus also manifest of the secondary substances that they are not in a subject. Right? So remember, I mean, we thought in a subject versus not in a subject was the definition of, or mark the division between substance and X. This is said of a subject and not said of a subject. And this is in a subject. I guess I drew it the other way last time, didn't I? This is not in a subject and in a subject. And we said these are primary substances, individual substances. These are secondary. And these down here are accidents. Right? We're not going to need to divide that to understand this treatment. So it is common to all substances not to be in a set. Okay, we can see that here, right? Primary substances, secondary substances, all not in a set. For a primary substance is neither said according to a subject nor is in a subject. Blah, blah, blah. Species human is said of a subject to some individual human but is not in a subject. Right, so it basically is saying what you can see from this diagram. It's common to all substances not to be in a subject. But then he adds, but this is not a proprium of substance. Rather, a differentia too is not in a subject. For neither bipedal nor footed is inhuman. Now, I mean, this reading cuts both ways, but I'm focusing first on the one way it cuts, because it says this is not that not to be in the subject is not a proprium of substance. Now remember, for it to be a proprium of substance, it would have to belong to all and only substances. And he says it's not a proprium of substance because although it belongs to all substances, it doesn't belong only to substances. It also belongs to differentiae. So that argument only makes sense if we know that differentiae are not substances. Right? Like if I say a raven, black is not a proprium of ravens because crows are also black, then my argument doesn't make sense unless crows are not ravens. I have to be giving something an example that's not a crow but is black. I mean, sorry, not a raven but is black. So differentiate, it looks like from that statement, and this is in the categories itself, it's not in the metaphysics. It looks from that statement like a differentiate is not a substance. And we think, although again, this reading also calls it to the question. We think, okay, it's not a substance, it must be an accident. And reading W also seems to point that way, also from the categories. Every substance seems to signify a certain individual this. Pareti is the Greek expression. It means like this here something. All right. A certain individual this. Now, with respect to primary substances, it is indisputable and true that they signify a certain individual this. Now, when you say the primary substance signifies it, I mean, it's a little weird. Maybe you should take it to mean the name of the primary substance. But then, of course, we had the question that different primary substances can have the same name. But all right, never mind that. Anyway, it is indisputable and true that they signify a certain individual this, for the indicated thing is individual and numerically one. With respect to secondary substances, they seem similarly from the figure of usage to signify a certain individual this, as when one says human or animal. But this is not true. Right. So in other words, he's pointing out that common nouns and proper nouns sound like they're the same part of speech or something like that. Would be one way of paraphrasing this. Maybe not a good way, but anyway, I mean, because not every noun is the name of a substance. But anyway, it's something in that vicinity. So, but he says, but a word like human or animal doesn't really name an individual thing, right? I mean, according to Plato, it does. And in a higher sense, right? It's like more properly speaking an individual than we are. It's really indivisible, which is what individual means, for example. So, but Aristotle is saying, no, there isn't some individual thing that's called human. Rather, they signify a certain quality. Okay, this is weird. So now he's saying a secondary substance signifies a certain quality. Well, or anyway, a certain howness, which is what the Greek word for quality means, and what qualitas means too in Latin. Qualitas is a word that was invented by Cicero to translate the Greek word poion, or poiates, really, I guess. But anyway, so again, this reading is kind of weirdly cutting both ways, but then he goes on to say, yeah. Oh, I guess he doesn't explicitly mention differentiae here, but it seems like differentiae would also fit into this same argument. The secondary substance doesn't simply signify a certain quality. Actually, maybe I shouldn't have been confusing. Anyway, this kind of points in the same direction, that primary substances are substances, and other like parts of their definition are really not substances, they're really some kind of quality. Okay, but we have more direct evidence that they're qualities, right? Like, so for example, reading Q, which is from the topic, says, when something is given in a definition, I'm adding this part in brackets. When something is given in a definition as a differentia, one should check whether the differentia given signifies not a certain quality, but a certain individual this. For it seems that every differentia signifies a certain quality. So there's like he's saying straight out differentiae are qualities. And again, quality is one of the 9 categories of accidents. Similarly, in reading V, in the metaphysics, quality is said in one way as the differentia of substance. And then this is where he gives bipedal as a differentiate of human, right? So Aristotelians are mostly going to say, no, that's not really the differentiate. Really, the differentiate is rational. But it's not, first of all, it's not even clear whether, according to Aristotle, every species only has one differentia. Right, that's why, my friend, the Aristotle scholar, said Porphyry totally, or at least I think that's part of why he thinks Porphyry totally distorted Aristotle. So this whole idea that there's a tree and that every species has one differentia and whatever is something Porphyry invented. I mean, I don't know about that. Porphyry has texts in Aristotle to back him up too, um, but it's the situation, and like Aristotle is hard to understand. I hope you're already getting you're getting that sense. Aristotle is hard to understand. I mean, there, he, you know, he wrote all these different books. It's sometimes hard to put them together. He also wrote in most cases, some books are more polished prose than others, but often the style is like very telegraphic. I mean, you notice how many things I have to add in brackets in the translation. Take all those things out and try to read it. Yeah.
Is it true that by legal or what and not? Yeah, just because other things are.
I mean, it seems like they're not appropriate either in the strict sense, right? Because like birds are bipedal and, like cows are quadrupeds. They're just accidents. They're like permanent accidents. Yeah. Um, but okay, so I mean, readings Q and V seem to say that they're qualities, but on the other hand, there's definitely room in them for saying, well, they're not qualities in the same sense, right? I mean, reading V actually started, quality is said in one way, right? So, like, that seems like the beginning of one of these lists of how the different ways the same word is used. So maybe we're suggesting that the word quality is equivocal, and in one sense, it applies to this category of accidents, but in another sense, it applies to differentiate. So I think the hardest case, though, or I mean, the one that most clearly points to differentiate literally being qualities. So if you look at reading you, so reading you is from a book called On Generation and Corruption. And it's part of an argument trying to establish that there are exactly four elements, right? And the four elements, now Aristotle didn't invent this list of four elements, right? It's a very widespread. I think even like across Europe and Asia, like something like this list of four elements, it goes back a long way, but Aristotle is trying to deduce it, trying to show why there's exactly four elements, namely earth, water, fire, or air and fire, in order from bottom to top. And in order to do that, um, he goes through a list of tangible contrarieties, right? Like pairs of tangible properties that are contrary to each other. So, right, hot, cold, dry, moist, heavy, light, hard, soft, viscous, brittle, coarse, fine. Why tangible qualities? Well, I mean, apparently because like uh, the bodies are essentially tangible or something like that, right? Like touch is really the sense that senses body. Um, um, that same thing, I guess that's kind of implicit in our authors in this course. I think it comes out even more in Locke and 100C. That yeah, they're really the sense, but we're really given the bodies are really given to his touch. So I don't know. Apparently that's why. Anyway, he's looking down this list of tangible contraries to find the ones that are fundamental or something like that. And then he's going to say, and so the simple bodies, the elements, are going to be differentiated by those fundamental tangible contraries. And, so eventually he whittles it down to hot versus cold and dry versus moist. And then he says something which causes, again, a bit of a problem because it looks like each element has two differentiae rather than one. Right? Fire is hot and dry, air is hot and moist, earth is cold and dry, and water is cold and moist. And those are all the possible combinations, right? Because you can't combine like hot and cold. So those are there's only four possible combinations, and that's why there's four elements. So, I mean, first of all, like these things like hot and cold and dry and moist are like explicitly given as examples of qualities in the categories. So it looks like we're talking about actual accidents in the category of quality. But it's worse than that because, and I think because I'm running out of time, I will not go into detail here, but I'll just say that um, readings R, S, and T make it clear that number one, the principles of bodies must include contraries, and number two, that substances don't have contraries. Right? I guess I can read that one. Reading S. It belongs to all substances that there is no contrary to them. Right? Like, what's the opposite of Bucephalus? Or what's the opposite of a horse? Right? I mean, it doesn't make sense. So now turning back to our hot, cold, and dry, moist pairs, the very reason we needed principles like that is because we needed principles that are contraries. So we settled down on these things, and they're on the list of qualities, and they're contraries to each other. So they're not substances. So it looks like they really are qualities in the usual sense. Those are all the reasons to say that differentiae are qualities and are therefore are accidents. I haven't left time to talk about why they're not, but as I pointed out, some of the readings I already said at the same time imply that they're not accidents. So that's the problem that our later authors are going to be trying to solve. Okay, I'll see you on Thursday.